Recent decisions by Colorado and Maine to remove Donald Trump from their ballots after determining that he is a constitutionally ineligible insurrectionist continue to vex the Republican Party. Because not only did Maine's GOP leader recently embarrass himself in an interview on this very topic, but Donald Trump's own attorney publicly confirmed rumors that Trump is terrified that even this version of the United States Supreme Court with a right-wing supermajority will uphold his disqualification. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at. I just want to say I think this is big, good news. Big news, good news. It's phenomenal because Donald Trump is a malignant narcissist who constantly tries to project strength. It's something that his MAGA cult says they adore about him. Now, we know he's fragile. He's the most fragile person to ever enter American politics. And so for him to betray, or his attorneys to betray and confirm rumors that he's nervous about a version of the Supreme Court that he helped give a supermajority. He put 3 of the 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court. He helped put them there. And he's nervous about how they'll rule. To me, that betrays the strength of the case against him. But let's play this clip and we'll unpack it together.
This is what Maggie Haberman had to say about the 3 justices that were appointed under President Trump and potential concerns about that. Watch this.
He has also voiced some concern that a court that has, he appointed 3 of the justices to the Supreme Court and it gave the conservatives a supermajority. He is concerned that they are going to look as if they're trying not to rule in his favor and might rule against him.
What do you say about that, Alina?
Yeah, that's a concern that he's voiced to me. He's voiced to everybody publicly, not privately. And I can tell you that his concern is a valid one.
So for her to publicly admit that, I mean, Alina Habba is a moron. We've done videos about her faux pas in the past. I mean, it just goes to show how weak Donald Trump's legal team is, relatively speaking. For her to confirm that's huge. That just, again, is yet another reason to believe that the case made from Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist, that it could be persuasive to even this iteration of the Supreme Court, that's huge. Now, there are other things I want to point out. So again, this concerns both Maine and Colorado, right? 2 states which have removed Trump from the ballot via 2 different means. It was Colorado's Supreme Court which made the decision there, and it was Maine's Secretary of State, their top election official, who made the decision in Maine. And again, this is something that vexes the Republican Party because it's 2 different states with 2 different mechanisms. And I want to play this clip here because the older gentleman here is a lifelong Republican who made the challenge. He was one who challenged Trump's candidacy, his eligibility in Maine, and one of the people who helped get Trump kicked off the ballot.
I do want to again point out you are a Republican. You voted for Donald Trump twice. Now you say that he's, quote, threatened the country that you love. I'm wondering what changed and why you're pursuing this when polling indicates that he's the candidate that most Republicans want.
January 6th, when I sat and watched that take place, it literally made me sick to my stomach. And I felt I had to take some action. Wasn't sure what that was going to be. Did a lot of studying on what the 14th Amendment, Amendment 14, Section 3 has to say. I did some work on trying to understand how that came into being and found out there were a lot of Mainers that were in the U.S. Senate at the time that helped develop it. And then Colorado ruled by saying, yes, he did cause an insurrection. I also read Senator Collins' comments when they tried to impeach Mr. Trump or President Trump right after the insurrection. She even called it an insurrection. So not knowing exactly what my path could be, I was given the opportunity because under Maine law, we actually have to have the Secretary of State determine how the election is going to run. And she made the determination, obviously, in the hearing that Mr. Trump was not qualified, which is our Secretary of State's job to do based on causing the insurrection in Washington on January 6th.
So there you have it. This guy is a former state lawmaker. He's a lifelong Republican. He voted for Trump twice. And I know that doesn't matter to MAGA cultists because whatever, again, personal history and professional history you have in terms of loyally supporting Donald Trump, if you deviate or waver from that for any reason, no matter how good or compelling, you're a rhino. It's like you were never loyal to him to begin with and you have no credibility. But to those of us who are sane, it matters that so many lifelong conservative Republicans who were loyal to Trump say that January 6th Donald Trump's attempts to steal a free and fair election are what changed their mind. And again, it was important for him to note that, Maine's Constitution and their system of government allows the top election official, the Secretary of State, to make these determinations. That's something that we've had to point out again and again and again in our videos on the topic. Now, with that in mind, the same CNN host who interviewed that lifelong Republican interviewed a different Republican, the chairman of the Maine Republican Party, to basically react to it. And this guy embarrasses himself. We're not going to play the whole clip because it's like 8 minutes, but you should watch it because he constantly trips over himself. He cannot answer a single question at all.
He's, of course, talking about the Secretary of State's decision to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. What is your response?
Well, Boris, I think the simplest way we can put this really is, we've got an unelected bureaucrat who likes to pretend that she's a lawyer, and she's literally taking away the voters' choices in Maine. Here in Maine and across the country, regardless of, whether they like Donald Trump or not, Bellows is wrong on so many levels, and it's getting to the point of really being embarrassing.
But if the state law, like the state constitution, makes it so that if someone has a complaint about a candidate, they take it up with the Secretary of State, who then is the arbiter, how could she be in the wrong for making a decision based on what was presented to her in that hearing?
Well, her decision process was just wrong. She's there to support Maine's voting rights, and she's doing exactly the opposite. We're going to fight this thing to the highest extent that we need to, and what she's doing is just flat out wrong.
And it goes on like this. And the CNN host says, okay, what specifically about her decision or her logic or her rationale is wrong? And this guy is unable to give a single answer to it. But again, Maine's Constitution allows for the Secretary of State to make these determinations. And you can disagree with the outcome. You can say that she got it wrong, but to suggest that she doesn't have the power to do it, as this man does, and to not be able to cite exactly what she got wrong or how she came to the wrong decision, it's really embarrassing. And that's just not some random citizen. That's the leader of Maine's Republican Party. But you'll note that implicit in his argument is this idea that, listen, the Secretary of State is actually coming down on voting rights, which, note the irony of a Republican in 2023 complaining about voting rights. These people do everything in their power to, shrink the right to vote, to make it difficult for eligible voters to turn out to vote because they're terrified of maximum eligible voter turnout because they know, generally speaking, they're just not very popular. That aside. But the implicit argument from these Republicans are, well, Donald Trump is popular and a lot of voters want him to be on the ballot. Ergo, you should rule that way. And Christina Bobb, another one of Donald Trump's attorneys, makes that, or I shouldn't say argument, makes that claim, that statement very explicitly.
The president is elected by the entire nation, and it should be the entire nation who determines who they want for president, whether they're guilty of insurrection or not. It's up to the people.
Right? So it doesn't matter. Listen, these Republicans, these conservatives who have said for the longest time, listen, we're not a democracy. It's not about majority rule. Democracy is when, it's about when two wolves and a sheep, decide what's for dinner, right? That's democracy. We're a republic. Well, now they want to have it the opposite way. Well, now it needs to come down to popular rule and majority rule. Well, Christina Bobb should take another civics class, right? Because she clearly failed. The president is not elected by the entire nation. The president is elected by electors from across the entire nation, from all 50 states. But the popular vote isn't what elects the president. I wish that were the case. She definitely doesn't, because if that were the case, Donald Trump not only would have lost the 2020 election, but he would have lost the 2016 election. Republicans need the Electoral College because they can't compete in terms of popular vote. But now she's appealing to that. And then she says, listen, even if the Constitution bars insurrectionists, you should still be able to vote for an insurrectionist president if that's what the people want. Constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe shuts that argument down pretty concisely.
They're basically arguments against the Constitution. They're arguments that say the Constitution of the United States made a big mistake in telling officials of the United States, especially a president, that if they take an oath to support the Constitution and then turn against it and engage in treachery against the Constitution, insurrection against it, then they can't run again. That provision just shouldn't have been there because it's not a good idea. If somebody is popular enough to potentially win, then they really ought to be able to run, even if they're disqualified. But there's no basis for that. It's like somebody saying, I don't like the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment means a lot of people die who shouldn't die, so I'm going to disregard it. You can't just take part of the Constitution and say you don't want to take it seriously. Either the Constitution is the law of the land, and it's the only fundamental law we've got, or it isn't. And in a year like
Again, well said, right? I mean, these people are using their own logic against them. I mean, if that's the case, then I want to throw out the Second Amendment, right? If you want to throw out Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, then I and others should be able to throw out the Second Amendment if we so choose. But then they're like, no, that's different. Well, listen, you can try to pick and choose because double standards are the only standards that Republicans and MAGA cultists employ, right? There's no consistency whatsoever. But at the end of the day, again, it's very simple. Either the Constitution is indeed the supreme law of the land, in which case it must apply to Republicans and Democrats alike, conservatives and progressives alike, and that includes Donald Trump, or it's not. And as I've said before in previous debates, from a sheer utilitarian perspective, if somebody comes to me and says, Josiah, I think that removing Donald Trump from the ballot would ultimately do more harm than good and trigger like a civil war or whatever, that's my opinion. I would actually entertain that argument. I don't agree with it, but that's something at least I can wrap my head around. What I can't wrap my head around is this idea that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and Donald Trump can be above it, right? These are mutually exclusive options. So if somebody wants to come to me and say, listen, yeah, you have him dead to rights. He was an insurrectionist. He did violate Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The Constitution does apply to him, but for the sake of the greater good, Donald Trump needs to be above the Constitution. If that's the argument you want to make, I disagree with it, but at least that's a consistent argument. Instead, what Republicans are doing is like, they have one foot in both worlds. Of course, the Constitution's the supreme law of the land. Of course, it applies to everybody. Yeah, because we're conservative Americans. But also, like, really not really like that. Can we please like ignore this one part because it helps our cult leader, which, by the way, again, if the shoe were on the other foot, they would never do that for a Democrat, which means we're not obligated to do it for Trump. Again, it is imperative in every single day, in every interaction we have with a conservative politically or in terms of discussion or discourse, you must always reject the double standard. If they try to impose a double standard on you, reject it. Flip the script. Say, listen, so if the shoe were on the other foot, are you saying that Barack Obama can engage in insurrection or Joe Biden or whatever? And you would just like, yeah, of course. And they have a right to do it and there should be no consequences for it. It's the same thing with Trump's immunity claims. Trump's a former president. He claims that he's above the law. He has absolute immunity. So if that's the case, Joe Biden has absolute immunity, right? Joe Biden can do whatever he wants, commit whatever crime he wants while he's in office. And you will oppose any attempts to hold him criminally or civilly accountable, right? Because that's the standard. And you'll watch them sweat and be like, well, that's different. And then you make fun of them relentlessly because they deserve it. Let me know what you think in the comments.